AskReddit by me Pingbad 6699. Mental professionals of Reddit, what is the worst mental condition that you know of? Cotard delusion. I'm a nurse and had to take care of a huge man with this condition. He came in with some odd behavior and escalated to Cotard. The delusion makes you think you are actually dead. He would scream he was dead all day and night. Lived in constant terror. He was such a sweetheart, but became so worn down and terrified over time he got quite dangerous and punched a nurse in the face. I had a patient check into the ER with this once, but I didn't know the name. She just kept claiming she was dead. She got Baker acted and transferred. Dementious. Watching a person, their memories, their personality die but their body remain living and confused, is horrifying. My grandma has dementia. She can barely talk right now, but she's still physically healthy, somewhat, and a lot of my closely related family died due to Alzheimer's. Granted, they acquired it started showing severe symptoms when already quite old, early to late 80s, but it's still a terrifying prospect to know that I'll probably die in such a way. I hope that when the time comes, and it starts to affect me in a significant way, my wishes will be respected and I'll be euthanized. Both to spare me the horrors of it, and to not be a depressing burden to those around me. I don't have it, but my psychiatrist referred to anorexia nervosa as a 7-year disease because in 7 years from diagnosis you're either in recovery or dead. Edit. If you're reading this, I'm really happy you're still here and I'm proud of you for fighting this. I'm an alcoholic coming up on 3 years sober. I tell people eating disorders are like telling me you can only have 3 shots of vodka a day. But you have to have 3, and then expecting a good outcome. I do not know how any person manages to survive anorexia, and I respect the hell out of those do. Delusional parasitosis comes to mind with this prompt. I've watched a patient go to well over a dozen doctors trying to get confirmation that they are parasite ridden. After countless still samples, blood work, labs, scans, biopsies, etc., she clearly didn't have any but remains convinced. A friend of my mom's ended up with something like this after getting into the wrong kinds of drugs. She was convinced that there were little bugs in her face. Absolutely convinced. She'd pick at her face day and night. Picked her face skin off bit by bit until the sight was horrific. She got clean for a little while, came to her senses, and stopped picking. But the damage was done. Her entire face was scarred. I need to get the fuck out of this thread. Same, but I can't. Paranoid schizophrenia is no joke. I had a PT that was so convinced that aliens were watching his life through his eye, so he tore it out with his bare hand. And didn't even regret it. My mom suffered from paranoid schizophrenia throughout my whole childhood. She thought my dad was trying to kill her and was making a pact with the devil as well as other things. Sometimes she was on meds and was okay, but she'd often stop them after a while. Shit was not fun to be around, and I hope to God I never have to experience it myself. I heard about a guy who thought he was on fire all the time he was awake. So he screamed until he passed out. Day after day. How can you even treat that? A friend had this for 3 days due to an alcohol and amphetamines binge. He was not the same after. Have a friend who works with seriously disturbed patients, and told me about a woman that habitually drank hand sanitizer. Apparently when you do that, your joints lock up and you have to be immediately rushed to the ER for treatment. And what do they have in the ER? Every 10 feet or so? Yeah, more hand sanitizer. So this woman would have to be restrained, otherwise they would find her in the hallway pumping it directly into her mouth all over again. I worked in a rehab and covered regulations were a trip BC. We had clients drinking hand sanitizer. I did not see that coming, lol. I worked in mental health years ago. We had a patient that had been institutionalized her entire life. She would insert pens and pencils in her arms and legs like an IV. It was horrendous. She was so sweet otherwise. Edited, grammar. I'm not a professional, but I have an immediate family member who is a diagnosed schizophrenic and borderline personality. It's one hell of a combo. My children's birth mother has both of them. I always check in with her mental health practitioner prior to visitation. It can be pretty intense at times, and while I am a firm believer of allowing the kids to see her on her bad days so they can understand why they can't live with her, I don't want to traumatize them. Honestly, mania. People's lives get ruined because of one manic episode. Thousands of dollars spent, random flights booked, and ending up on the other side of the planet with no way of getting back. Deleted. Childhood disintegrative disorder. https://en.m.wiki.org/childhood_disintegrative_disorder (common nightmare fuel of the highest order). The child starts to regress in development, language and speech starts deteriorating, lowering acquired motor skills, losing ladder control, progressing until they are vegetative and non-communicative. The person that the child was has disintegrated completely. We have no idea what causes it nor any treatments, no detection of it beforehand. But what turns it into pure nightmare fuel is that there actually is one preceding symptom. The child is utterly gripped by fear and intense feelings of something being very wrong with them, often complaining to the parents that something is terribly wrong with them. Severe feelings of impending doom. That is a symptom in a few things. I can't think of one that isn't life-alteringly awful. The least worst I can think of is a heart attack. Outside of thought disorders like schizophrenia, scrupulosity OCD is pretty brutal. Basically, it's this fixation on going to hell, and the person is convinced they're going there no matter what. At its worst, it's all they can think about and talk about, distracting them from work and family. Knowing they'll burn in eternal torment one day slowly drives them mad. Hi, I'm in recovery for that. I can agree. I was raised in a very religious environment, and amp, with OCD at like 10 might as well be prepared for hell lol. Not mental health care, but I work in hospice. The worst case of dementia I ever saw was a woman who had hidden her childhood trauma from her children, when got dementia and her only remaining memories were of abuse. She spent her days scream crying and trying to break herself out of her room, bloody fingers and all. It was horrific for her family, staff, her husband. Worst thing I've ever witnessed. That can happen? Holy shit, I just hope I die of something else before dementia has a chance to get me. I have so much damn trauma I can't do anything with anymore. I just shove it down and pretend it isn't there. Meds have helped a bit. Therapy did jack shit. I have a friend with schizophrenia and it's hell for her. I wrote a big post, https://www.reddit.com/r_med_chem/s/mnoszheoh about schizophrenia and one user who lived with tardive dyskinesia due to its treatment. Deleted. Not strictly a mental condition but a genetic disease with a related effect. Lesch-Nyhan syndrome is caused by a mutation in a particular pathway. Kids with the syndrome compulsively self-mutilate. Eat their own lips, fingers and noses unless restrained. I've been told by someone who worked with such kids that they also tend to be surprisingly sweet and positive along with profound cognitive issues. Pictures of kids with the disorder are nightmare fuel though. I work in psych intensive care. We had a guy with autophagia as a form of self-harm. He ate huge chunks of flesh off of his arms when he was hearing voices. That was pretty bad. Drugs are the worst though. Meth literally burns holes in your brain. I've seen brain scans from patients. Lots of people who are revived post-opiate overdose have hypoxic and oxic brain injuries. It's like they've had a lobotomy. It's awful. Those drug-related brain injuries are permanent too. They'll never be able to live independently ever again. Not a medical professional, but for anyone interested in these cases I strongly recommend a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks. It describes different case studies including people with aphasia, face blindness, people who feel their body parts aren't their own. A man fell out of bed because he found a strange leg in his bed and threw it out. It was his own leg, hence he fell together with it. I have PTSD. It turns your body and mind into a torture chamber. See PTSD here. I describe it as parts of my mind physically hurt all the time, constant pain and tension in parts of my body, and bad at regulating my emotions, and paranoia. Body integrity disorder, believing a part of your body isn't yours and needs to be removed. I knew a patient that removed her eye. Some of the rarer dementias. There's one that literally turns a perfectly normal person into a psychopath. All their other faculties remain intact. There are dementias that literally melt your brain and don't even have a name. There are familial types of dementia so specific to certain families that they don't have a name but can develop really early, and again you know it's coming your way. And then there's Huntington's, which you likely know you're getting and have seen your loved ones go through it first. The embedded hallucinations in Lewy bodies can go either way, very distressing or comforting. With the non-organic illnesses, it's a toss-up between treatment-resistant psychosis and severe emotionally unstable personality disorder for the impact on quality of life. As someone who has experienced it twice, I have to say the worst is a drug-induced neuropsychiatric movement disorder called Akathisia. The terror is unlike anything. I can genuinely say I would rather die than ever go through it again. OMG yes. I had this while in the hospital. I was given IV Reglan due to uncontrollable vomiting and the akathisia was instant and completely unbearable. I couldn't stop myself from moving and felt like I wanted to crawl out of my skin. I kept shuffling my feet and the anxiety was so intense I swore I was going to die. Thankfully my nurse was able to get us to order for IV Benadryl. Once it kicked in I was so profoundly grateful to be back to normal that I burst into tears and hugged my nurse for a good minute or so. I hope I never experience that hell again. For any mental professional, if he or she would ever come across it, it's got to be fatal familial insomnia. There's nothing they could do but watch the patient waste away, if said patient doesn't kill him herself first. It's exceedingly rare. Thankfully, only 40 or so cases as of 2022. This was the first thing that came to mind when I read the question, although I don't think it qualifies as a mental condition considering it has a known physical cause. It's a prion disease. I can't recall exactly how I learned of FFI, but it was during adolescence and the discovery sent me down a very long, terrifying rabbit hole. I'm not a professional, but after seeing the damage dementia can do, I can't imagine anything else would hold a candle to that. Rest easy, Grandma. Same here. I watched that movie Grace, which is a documentary that the old couple signed consent forms to have the whole thing documented. Grace and her husband were filmed as Grace went through Alzheimer's disease. I was becoming a CNA at the time and my instructor made us watch it. I broke into tears toward the end of the show. To slowly lose your loved one as they stop remembering literally everything over the course of years. Props to that old man and anyone else who has to go through it. I'd say the worst has to be schizoaffective disorder. It's basically a combination of both schizophrenia and bipolar depression disorder. Yes, when you aren't having a psychotic episode you're having a manic episode. Schizophrenia is one of the worst mental disorders, but mixing it with another one? That's hell. I'd say it really depends. I got diagnosed with schizoaffective almost 7 years ago. They told me I'd have it for life. After getting out of the psych ward, I stopped hallucinating and never did sober again. For a while I had something more akin to complex PTSD, and now I have a subclinical version of that. I'm pretty functional though what I went through haunts me all the time. Often mental illness is just shit life syndrome and unprocessed trauma. I'm sure some people have genuine underlying neurological dysfunctions, but way more people have problems of living. If you torture anyone enough, they're liable to have a mental breakdown. There are no specific pharmaceutical interventions for BPD itself, but pharmaceuticals can help with accompanying issues, and BPD actually does respond quite well to psychotherapy, which is a medical intervention. The difficulty lies in getting someone with BPD to go to therapy and stick with it. I have BPD, been through therapy numerous times and always stuck to it religiously, and while I did respond well and it was effective, it almost wears off after a few years, so you always need to go back. Which is a problem as so few counselors are trained in personality disorders and they're so expensive. I can't afford to go back right now, but I'd love to. Not nearly the worst. Pique, eating things that aren't food, is probably the worst I've seen. But dissociative fugue really blows my mind. I've always wondered how many missing person cases are just a result of DF. As someone with a related disorder, trichophagia, plus pique, it really is horrible. You get shamed and ashamed a ton. Do I think it's worse than, say, capgras or even schizophrenia? No. But it really does suck. That's a hard one to answer because everybody is so different, and their experiences of mental illness can be so different. For instance, I've worked with people with chronic schizophrenia with hallucinations so horrendous you can barely imagine, and others who manage the same chronic mental illness with totally different symptoms and a high quality of life. I can definitely think of individuals with particular presentations of mental illnesses I would consider to be the worst I've ever seen, but thankfully not everyone with those illnesses will have that same experience. Rapid cycling bipolar disorder. Good luck building up your life with that. It's horrible and practically impossible from what I've seen. Just got diagnosed with this 6 months ago. Every day is different for me and I can't switch up so fast. It's truly a roller coaster of a way to live. Locked-in syndrome. I was thinking about that as a neurological disorder. All my teachers would constantly say how hard it was. People who are otherwise 100% healthy, perfect cognition, are suddenly trapped inside an almost lifeless body. I recommend the movie The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. True story about it and just amazing. The guy managed to write an entire book, The Diving Bell itself, just by blinking, one letter at a time. Schizophrenia, disorganized. Just looks exhausting. Reading through these, there are definitely scarier. But someone who is catatonic gives off a different level of concern. Basically, your mind moves so fast you become disabled and cannot move, sometimes for days. Think full-on human statues. When I was going for my associates, we had a really interesting abpsych professor. He used to conduct studies on catatonics. Sometimes if you sped up the video over a period of time, you could see that many were actually carrying out a task, like itching their face or adjusting their hair. I work in the field but not as a clinician, yet. I find NPD really hard to deal with. You get these charming PPL with absolute destruction in their wake. I work in a ward where you get forced to go and legally can't leave, so we see the extremes of each condition. It's early in the morning for me and just getting coffee, so probably a dumb question, but NPD equals narcissistic personality disorder? I'm assuming so from the context, but I've noticed that my understanding of the shortened versions of things is out of date, lol. I've also heard it's the hardest to diagnose and treat, mainly because they have a blindness to what they're doing and don't seek help, but also they don't participate in their treatment. Of course, that's coming from just what I've read about it and could be entirely off base. I heard anorexia has the highest mortality rate and a relapse rate higher than heroin. You can withdraw from an addictive substance, move away from your old crowd, etc., but eating and not eating are unavoidable parts of everyday life. Not a MHP, but I would say anything is terrible if you are aware in it. I am diagnosed BPD, bipolar 1, PTSD, and OCD. I also have pretty severe dissociation. I am so brutally aware of the ridiculous, irrational things I think and do. I take meds, I go to therapy, but I don't feel like it truly ever gets better. I have intrusive thoughts from OCD that affect my relationship greatly, but I can't stop myself from acting on them sometimes, and it's like my rational self is watching my mentally ill self do these things and I'm like why? I will ruin everything around me and be completely aware and shameful. I will think paranoid thoughts and know that I'm crazy, but I cannot control them. It's like, you know you're not thinking straight, but the mental illness always overtakes you. It always wins. You just watch and wonder what kind of life you're leading. To be ignorant makes any mental con. Cotard syndrome. Now here's a beauty. Mind you, it is not a contest. Most of them are very undesirable. Man, almost makes me believe in ghosts, demons. Supernatural voice telling you that you are already dead. Go to the morgue to hang out other dead people. That's like what a demon would tell you. I 100% do not believe in ghosts, etc. but this condition. How could you tell? Yikes. Mental health care trained. Ended up in a different field. Manipulative personality traits. They aren't really diagnosable. They can be treatable, but paying for treatment is a nightmare cause it's hard to get a proper diagnosis. Manipulative personality disorder isn't a DSM-V disorder, but borderline personality is, but borderline doesn't cover actively manipulating family and children so that an adult can have an advantage. Manipulative personalities and behaviors create family environments which are hostile and abusive. But nothing can be done until the abuse happens. It's a gray area, which is why I think it's difficult. I agree. I find NPD really hard in my workplace. I mean, worst is schizophrenia because it are a combination of many different mental illnesses. But for me it must be bipolar because I have some family members with bipolar. Body integrity dysphoria is an interesting one. Basically, these people feel they should be disabled in some way and will often act to make their body conform to that image. Self-amputation included. Anorexia. Highest suicide rate of any mental health disease. Huntington's disease. I'm a master's student and my research work is around HD. It has the symptoms of Alzheimer's, schizophrenia and Parkinson's combined. Although it affects 1 in 10,000, it is a genetic disorder where even if one of your parents has the mutated gene, you have a 100% chance of getting it. People have gone to extreme lengths of sterilizing their reproductive system in order to stop passing down the gene. It is a progressive disease, and it only gets worse with time. Starts from muscle twitching, to involuntary movements, inability to speak and full muscle paralysis. The symptoms get worse with time. In fact, it gets so much worse at the end that the only relief is death to oneself. Life expectancy is max 30 years after diagnosis. My wife, therapist, had a client with FND, functional neurological disorder. This means that they had the symptoms of a neurological condition, in this case, seizures, but there was nothing physically wrong with their brain. It's one of the worst ones because you're basically told it's all in your head and there's nothing we can do about it. There's very little information about how to treat it, and doctors don't take it as seriously as a neurological condition that shows up on a brain scan. Locked-in syndrome. From midbrain damage. Can't breathe on your own, can't move arms, legs or speak. Generally communicate from eye movement blinking. Awake and cognizant the whole time. Schizophrenia. I know dementia is terrible, but at least most who have it have a normal life for most of their life. Schizophrenia is a range of conditions, but all of them are so insidious because the person may be very intelligent but doesn't understand that their strange thoughts and voices aren't normal. It's all a conspiracy and everyone knows. Including the doctors and medications. There's literally no win. Many, but schizophrenia or severe PTSD tops the list. Perceptual disorders are tough for sure, but the psychological suffering of those with PTSD is devastating in all areas of life, including their families. As someone who has BPD, those things are not true for everyone, but it takes a lot to get into remission. In my experience, people tend to give up because it takes so long. Occupational therapist, so more physical rehab, but let me say Huntington's is one that really stands out. It impacts your cognition, your behavior, and has debilitating physical effects. Awful, terrible. It is entirely genetic. And the fact that it strikes you in your 30s, 40s is especially heartbreaking. Not a mental condition, but I interned at a facility with a fatal familial insomnia patient. They were in therapy solely to help them cope with their impending fatality and working with the patient once they began hallucinating. It was horrible to watch how quickly they deteriorated. They died 8 months after showing symptoms. Not a professional, but emo PTSD is one of the worst. My dad is a Desert Storm combat vet, and he is fucked. He went undiagnosed and untreated my entire childhood, and he was straight up abusive. Physically, mentally, verbally, all of it. He became extremely suicidal in my later teen years, and became extremely violent to people in public, and we finally had to force him into therapy or an inpatient program. He's doing good now, no longer an abusive asshole, but damn did it ruin some lives.